call the meeting to order. May we have roll call, please? Here.
Here.
Here. Here. Here. Here.
Okay, thank you. If you haven't turned off your cell phones yet, would you check them, please? Make sure they're off. The first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the July 12th, 2013 meeting. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Mr. Sheridan, thank you. Do we have a second? Ms. Hughes, thank you. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We'll open up for public comment if there's anyone here wishing to speak to the board at this time. Seeing none, we'll close public comment. We have no public meeting items. We have no public hearing items. Our future meetings are August 13th, August 27th, and September 10. All of those are scheduled to be regular meetings. Do we know at this time if all those meetings are set to occur? Okay, thank you. Okay, at this time, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn, and then we can go into our work session. So, motion to adjourn. I'm sorry? Motion to adjourn. Thank you. Is there a second?
Sure. Second.
Mr. Sheridan, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. We stand adjourned. And now we'll open it up for a work session. Not yet.
Oh.
Okay, the first item on the agenda of the work session is parliamentary procedures, and we've got someone from the city attorney's office.
Madam Chairperson, thank you very much. Based on a meeting a couple of meetings ago, the board wanted to discuss motions and how to make motions. So we invited Jennifer Nix from the city attorney's office so that she can go over parliamentary procedures. And I'll turn it over to Jennifer.
Thank you.
Sure I have. I think two of us have already. Thank you. So we're excused then?
I have one extra one if anybody. Good evening. Again, my name is Jennifer Nix. I'm from the City Attorney's Office. A couple of you on the board I recognize. I used to be the Code Enforcement Board Attorney. So you've heard some similar things that I'm going to touch on today anyways. I was asked to come and give a general discussion and information regarding parliamentary procedure and making motions. So I gave you all handouts. You don't have to read every word of that right now. It's mostly informational for you later. If you want to flip through it, feel free. A lot of it that's in your handouts I am going to touch on now, but I'll just kind of get going. Feel free to stop me. I won't be offended by any means if you have questions, so you don't forget your question or lose your place or anything. And I'll just kind of launch into it and stop me if you need to. And then once I'm done anyways, we'll see if you guys have any questions. Regarding, to do the typical attorney thing and start with a quote from Abe Lincoln, regarding the rules of parliamentary procedure, he had said, "We will be respectful of one another even when we disagree. We will direct all comments to the issues. We will avoid personal attacks. Politeness costs so little." Basically, parliamentary law is an organized system that allows a group of people to come together and make a decision. The system is made up of basic principles and rules that determine how the group will proceed through the decision-making process. The purpose of This parliamentary procedure is to protect the rights of individuals, to combine their efforts with others to accomplish common goals, to enable individuals to debate, and to take action in an equitable manner with a minimum of controversy. So if you can imagine back before they had any kind of procedural rules, people probably just screamed at each other. The rules of parliamentary procedure, which are based on common sense and logic, are designed to protect the rights of board members in the majority to make decisions, the rights of the board members in the minority to be heard, the rights of the individual members, and the rights of absentees, and a careful balance of the rights of the organization as a whole. The rights of subgroups within it and the rights of individuals must be maintained. Parliamentary procedure should help and not hinder the decision-making. So basically, I'll just kind of touch on the duties of the chairperson. You, of course, have a chairwoman, Ms. Moore, and the duties of the chairperson. A lot of this, you all, is going to seem obvious, so excuse me for belaboring the obvious points, but to touch on them all. By electing a chair, the board delegates to the chair the authority to make necessary ruling on questions of parliamentary law and the duty to assure that meetings are conducted in an effective and orderly manner. The chairperson's duties are to open general meetings, announce the issues before the board members, recognize board members, state and put to vote all legitimate questions, protect board members from obviously frivolous or dilatory motions, to enforce the rules of debate, to keep the floor open for debate, to expedite matters, decide all questions of order, respond to parliamentary inquiries, authenticate all acts of the board, and to declare the meeting adjourned. Expectations of the chairperson. Chairperson, as everyone, should be fair, yet firm. Never engage in debate or take sides without first relinquishing the chair. Be knowledgeable of issues on the floor. Be aware of which motions are in order or out of order, and which are debatable or non-debatable, and which motions are pending. And generally, to prevent the abuse of parliamentary procedure. The rights of the board members. All members have the same rights to obtain the floor, introduce motions, enter discussions, oppose, amend, and vote on motions, to inquire about which issue is being voted on, call the chair's attention to breaches of procedure, appeal the chair's decisions, call for the order agenda of the day. And during a debate, all board members have the right to speak, but should first be recognized by the chairperson, allow other members to speak before you speak again, speak only to the motion on the floor, refrain from using inflammatory language or making personal attacks, address all remarks to the chairperson, and remember that not all motions are debatable. Generally, the principles of debating, their recognition. Most of the time, a member needs to be recognized by the chair in order to start speaking. Interruption. Most of the time, a member cannot interrupt another speaker. Second, most motions must be seconded. Debate. Most motions are not debatable. To amend, most motions are not amendable. And voting. All motions require a majority vote. And everyone on the board should be voting on all the issues unless there's some serious reason to abstain, such as voting conflict, but that would seemingly be the only one. As far as the steps of the debating process, the board member addresses the chairperson. There's a recognition of the chairperson by the board member. To, obtain the floor. The board member has the floor. The board member is going to introduce their motion. Another board member is going to second the motion. At that step, there's an informal discussion. So the chairperson and the introducer of the motion can discuss modifications or withdrawal of the motion. Statement of the question. The chairperson states the motion to the board members for their consideration. And then, of course, there's the debate. Board members debate the merits of the motion. Amendments may be submitted and acted on. All comments should be directed to the chair. And whoever actually makes the motion should have an opportunity to speak again once everybody else is done talking, if they would so choose. Board members then, of course, vote whether to end the debate and start the voting process. There's a restatement of the question. Before the voting process actually begins, the chairperson should repeat the question just to ensure that everyone is aware, following the discussion, exactly what the initial motion was. Then there's a vote, and the chairperson announces the results of the vote, and that's the abridged version. Generally, as far as the motions go, there are your main motions. That is going to be your original main motion. I move to whatever it is you're moving to do. A lot of the time, there might be a motion to amend by another board member. When somebody makes a motion, and then a second person is looking to amend the motion, delete a word, add a word, clarify something, whatever the case is. Once somebody's make a motion to amend the original motion, that needs voted on, which I think a lot of people don't think about. Oh, well, you just accept the friendly amendment? Yeah, sure. Because a lot of the boards are, friendly enough, and it doesn't seem so straight-laced or contentious or anything like that. But we do need to remember, when there is an original motion and somebody does want to amend it, you have to vote on how to amend the motion. So, I move that the Oviedo flag is going to be blue with a rooster on it, and then Ms. Hughes says that she would like to amend my motion to delete the word blue and make it red. Then the board needs to vote on whether to change the motion to have red instead of blue. And then we're back to the original motion, which is now amended to say blue flag with rooster on it. And so that might seem like a silly example and a very simplistic one, of course, but I don't think that everyone on any board necessarily thinks about the fact that amendments to the motion, when made, actually need to be voted on as well. Are there any questions there?
Real quick, what happens then if a motion is not, the amended motion is not restated that way and voted upon? And we just put it through with the friendly motion. What happens to the original motion? Is it still held?
As far as, are you talking about in the past? Like past decisions, excuse me, that have...
Three meetings ago, and I have no idea whether it happened off the top of my head. We had an amendment to a motion, we friendlied it, it was fine, everybody voted, we voted only on the first motion.
Especially
where did that
given...
wind up standing?
I'd say, and looking backward at things like that, I wouldn't worry about it if no one's necessarily challenged it, and it's in the minutes were approved, and whoever the applicant was, or whatever the decision, the deal was. If there were no issues, let's just vote on all the motions to amend moving forward, and they'll be properly reflected in the minutes. But I wouldn't be overly concerned by any means that any past decision that was made in a friendly amendment to it and then it voted upon being discredited is what I said now. But just in case someone...
We've never done that.
A lot of boards haven't.
I have a
So,
question.
yes.
I always thought that if it was a friendly amendment, the motioner agreed and the seconder agreed, then it was read as the amended motion, that the only time you had to vote on the amendment was if the motioner did not agree.
Okay, hold on. Let me make sure I'm following it.
For example,
Okay. thank
Larry
you.
makes a motion.
Yes.
Steve offers an amendment to it. Larry agrees with the amendment, and whoever seconded it agrees with the amendment. Then we discuss the motion at that point as amended, and then take a vote on that. The only time we have to take a vote on the amendment to the motion is if the motioner does not agree and the seconder does not agree.
I would say that you need to take a vote even if Larry and Steve both are saying that's a great friendly amendment, because that's just how the Roberts Rules things work. And for just to pretty much keep something procedurally in line with how you guys do things, that's how moving forward. If it were me, and I know you're on board, but I would submit to you that it's best to vote.
Okay, now, not sure. If he made the motion and then he withdrew his original motion, and I agreed to withdraw it also, and then make a new motion with the amendment, the new amended motion, can you do that?
If he made his motion and then wanted to withdraw it before it was
voted on.
Before anyone amended it or before it was voted on? Was it seconded?
Yeah, and if I agreed, say, I seconded it, and I agreed to withdraw, my second, and he would agree to withdraw his original motion, and then redid the motion with the amendment.
So you're saying
what I'm going?
basically instead of doing it by way of
Voting,
I
everybody.
make a motion and then somebody seconds, and then we got to do this little vote before we get here, you're saying, what if we just rip it off the table by withdrawing it?
Withdraw it, and then redo the motion
And
again.
then you make a new motion.
Yeah, make a new motion.
Right. I think it's 6 of one, half dozen of another there.
I see, okay. Instead of everybody voting on it, he just says, well, I withdraw my original motion. I withdraw being second it, and he proposes a new motion with the amendment.
That's one way to do it. I mean, if it's not,
Instead of going up.
if it's something where, it is a relatively simple fix or something like that, and it can just be amended, the motion,
Just withdraw and redo it.
I mean, really either
Yeah, okay.
way is going to solve the issue, presumably. Any other questions?
So, to be clear, then are we saying we should vote on the amendment to the motion?
Yes.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Sheridan?
one thing we need to take into consideration is our computerized system. And it might be easier to actually withdraw the motion and make a new motion with the amended language rather than try and set up amendment after amendment into a computer system.
I don't know. I think that if, can you repeat what you said? I was thinking about.
The minutes are done on a computer system, and to have the motions done, there'd have to be another motion. So if we're having to vote on amendments, it would actually be easier within the computer system to withdraw the motion and just make a new motion rather than vote on 3 different amendments.
Sure. I see your point. I do. I guess I'm not a huge personal fan of if something's seconded, it probably should be voted on, so I'd probably rather actually say to amend it. But is that truly going to be an issue with the computer system?
It's
To
gonna be
where,
more difficult, for sure.
how are things entered? I'm just not familiar, so I apologize, just to,
Neither is she.
Yeah.
often they do.
Mr. Wright?
The only I respond to that is, I look at what we did last week, the last 2 weeks ago. We would have had to have withdrawn the motion 3 times and restated it 3 times because we added 3 amendments to the motion. So that could become a little cumbersome. That would be my thought process.
And really, I mean, if something is seconded, if an original motion is seconded, it should go to a vote. So that's why it's better to amend the motion. So I'm sorry, I got caught up with the withdrawing. So I wasn't thinking about the second when you were saying you seconded.
Well, if I withdrew the second also, though. It's half, like you said, half doesn't do it.
Yeah.
So
But I mean, there's nothing wrong with, even though the minutes might seem long, or unfortunately you might get annoyed keeping up with it, but, then there's truly a good record of the discussion too, and how things were amended, incorporated into the minutes, instead of just looking, I don't know. I don't know that as a board, how great it would look in the minutes for people that were attending the meeting to keep making motions, pull it, instead of just amending it procedurally proper,
I mean, how we've done it is, we just kind of keep a tally of amendments, as they come across, or if there is any. And then we try to restate the motion at the end for the vote. correctly stated, usually we ask staff's help to state it correctly.
With, just as a matter of clarification for me, because I don't typically attend y'all's meetings, and there wasn't something on the agenda for me to follow the process this evening, do you get a staff report with a recommended motion, or do you all just off the cuff make your,
No, yes.
okay. Yeah. Right, which is helpful. Okay, so it's a lot of on the fly. Okay. And while this might seem, while it might seem like an obvious fix for a second, sometimes it helps to write them out before you state them, but then you're sitting there writing it out and everything, and somebody might just want to amend it anyway. But that's, one thing to consider doing to try to clean it up, but I know once it gets, discussions kick in and things change.
A lot of times either things that the public has said during the public hearing portion of it, comments they've made, or perhaps things that the applicant has offered. While it may not have been in our packet, all of a sudden we're hearing about something, or
Right.
someone has a question about an issue and then something else comes up that
Right.
maybe the rest of us hadn't considered. So a lot of times when we have discussion like that, that's when the amendments come up based on the things that we're hearing for the first time here.
One thing also to consider, but I mean, everyone has to be clearly on total same page about how they feel, and things have been kind of fleshed out, but everybody can always vote no on a motion and then come up with a brand new motion that would properly and directly address what the issue is, which, might help for clarification. Flip side of that is if someone's confused or thinks that discussion's over and not realizing that, oh, well, let's just call the question so we can all vote no. I mean, that might put a vote that I don't want you voting in a way that you disagree with because you're just trying to vote to get that motion off the table and dealt with. I mean, what it kind of sounds like is if you have your motion and your second, you have your informal discussion, obviously you're not going to get to the debate before somebody would have had the opportunity to withdraw their motion is the issue, I think, to where it might just seem like kind of a convoluted, but you have to amend it several times process, or just vote on it, be done with that motion, and totally restructure something to clearly, after it's been whittled down, address what the board actually wants to specifically address after all the information's come out. What do you guys think would be most helpful? Because I don't know how your meetings totally go. Does it seem like after you have a lot of the information, it is so large that you're afraid to do a bunch of amendments? I mean, if...
I'm not afraid to do a bunch of amendments.
Okay.
I don't think that's been the problem.
Just so I'm clear.
I don't think there's been an item we voted on that hasn't had at least one amendment.
Probably. Well, there's been some when there's been no discussion at
Right.
all, but
Very
Yeah.
basic ones, but I mean, anything that we've really had debate on, there's probably been at least one or two amendments. And I mean, last meeting alone, there were 3 of them in the one motion that we had.
And I mean, in one way to kind of, there's more than one way to skin a cat, but as far as, if there's the motion and the second, you have a little bit of an informal discussion to where, oh, do we need to amend it at all? Okay. And then you say, here's what the motion is, and then everybody starts talking with their debate. Amendments can still be made at that point, and what you may want to do is just ensure that you guys are really fully developing your discussion before everyone starts making amendments, to where you can, craft your discussion of things to where, well, how would everybody feel about if we amended it to do this, and kind of take the temperature to know that you're going in a direction to kind of craft your amendment to the motion and have that voted on and hopefully go the way that you want it if you're the one amending the motion, instead of, and this is me making assumptions because I haven't sat through one of your discussions before, of course, but, and say other boards that I've been in front of that they go and amend something, it might be because, so they make the motion, make their second, kind of informal, discuss it, we're good with that, great. Chairman restates the question, opens the floor for debate, and sometimes people are very quick to, well, what if you amended your motion to say this? And the discussion's really not to the meat of it yet. And if everybody just kind of held back to really flesh out the discussion a bit more before 5 amendments flew out the gate, that may clean it up a little bit.
Well, I understand, if we did, we discussed it, made a motion second, and all of a sudden we just start discussing amendments, it would be best just you make the motion, vote on the motion, disagree with it, everybody says nay or whatever, and then go back to discussing what type of amendments to make to it.
Motion's dead at that point, so,
No, what do you think?
Motion's either passed or failed, and if it's
Yeah.
passed, you can't amend it.
you can't amend it.
Right, and that's where I was saying, like, maybe it's not best to just, if you know that the board wants to amend it, I hesitate then to say, hey, just vote on it, because you may think, hey, we're just voting on it and it's gonna die, and I'll make the next, motion instead, and then it passes, and you're standing there going, wait, what? I was gonna amend that, now this passed, that's not what I wanted to happen, I should have made an amendment, oops, yes.
Kind of like the idea of, I think one of the things we struggle with at the end is that we try to compile all of the motions and the amendments together at the very end.
To restate it, to vote on it.
So as an amendment would come forward, if we could pin it down, the language, quantify it, and then maybe restate that motion with that amendment, then we can move forward for any others.
Okay.
Maybe that would be a suggestion that way. That way, by the end, we don't have to go back and try to figure out the language for the 3 to whatever amendments are. I'm still unsure why we have to, I guess maybe not understanding parliamentary procedure enough then that we would have to actually vote, approve the amended statement, and then continue on with the primary motion, but I'm not sure are we going to try to do that, or are we going to, are we doing something wrong in a sense by just making friendly amendments and getting approval of the motioner and seconder?
Potentially your board and a million other boards across the United States, if they wanted to be very technical about the rules of parliamentary procedure, and I had brought with me my Robert's Rules of Order book.
Oh,
And
boy.
while it looks small,
It's huge. It's huge, yeah.
it's 700 pages long. So no wonder people are confused about parliamentary procedure.
Mr. Lopez?
I used to be parliamentarian years ago, so.
Yes.
Realistically, what she's saying is, the proper rule is to vote on the amendment before we continue on.
Vote on the amendment to the motion.
Right. And that's really what we should be doing, which we don't do, as we've all indicated, is to collaborate all the detail together and make a final motion. that's really what we should be doing. And I guess it's up to the chair if you want to follow that to the extent of the letter, or modify it to our needs, as long as we act on it in a
Consistent.
cohesive manner all the time, and not deviate from that faction. I think that's the
Right,
short of
and,
it.
yeah, and I mean, while I would certainly suggest voting on the amendment to the motion, and I know that this is quite the read, sometimes even finding something in it can be a little difficult. However, if making amendments to motions is a prevalent issue, you know, in your meetings, that might be just one of the ones that you want to ensure that you follow. You know, if you know that every time that there's a hearing, the first motion's amended 4 times, you probably want to, I would make sure that I was voting on the amendments, if it was me.
I have a follow-up question.
Yes.
So going in the same, if, for instance, the amendment, the motion is made, and we go through the motioner, the seconder, neither agree to the amendment, so we don't have to vote on it at that point, but the person making the amendment still can then ask for a vote, or does they make another motion for an unfriendly amendment?
It's my understanding that the friendly amendment thing, just pretend you never heard of it. Like, if we could all forget about it, because it's not that, you know, if you make a motion to have the flag be red with the rooster, and Ms. Hughes says, I'd like to make a motion to amend, you know, the vice chair's motion, you don't get to say whether you want friendly amendment or not. She called for an amendment of your motion, and now everybody gets to vote on her motion to amend your original motion, even if you are spitting mad about it and disagreeing.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, good. So I helped clarify that. Because I know it can be a little bit,
The way we do it, we kind of ask permission from the people. And,
as do several boards,
yeah.
you know, and, but there, you know, there again shows where that could be an issue, because then people could just, your motion's on the table, and if you got a second and
No.
kept saying no to every amendment and pushed it to a vote, like, it's just going to be a lot more consistent if people
I
are,
guess
of course, voting.
The question for
on the amendment.
again, taking one more step,
Okay,
in your example,
yes,
Ms. Hughes makes an amendment, a motion to make an amendment to the original motion. Does then she need a second
Yes.
for that to vote on?
and her motion may fail. You know, it's not that every, you know, as you know, sitting on a board, not every amendment to the motion is well received by the majority of the board to change it,
And that
certainly.
It makes it simpler, but like I said, it's just not, I think, you know, 99, I don't think we've ever done it that the other way. so,
Yeah.
You know, so it's been going on for a number of years that way, so.
No, I understand.
Even the friendly motions that we make now, or if we make an amendment, there usually isn't a second, you know, it's not, it's just call the question to the two people and they agree, you know. I don't think we've ever had an issue where, I mean, I think we've had issues where somebody does not agree, probably been me, but but, you know, I don't think we've ever taken it to the next level where somebody's basically, you know, said, okay, well, we don't care about what you think, and. Yeah, exactly, so.
Right.
But, you know, voting on them, you know, makes it very clean. It doesn't carry away a lot of suggestions.
True.
I have a question. So that happens, there's 2 amendments made, and I'm the one who had the original motion, and I didn't like the 2 amendments, and I said, well, you know what? I want to withdraw my motion, because I don't like the 2 amendments. Now what happens?
I wouldn't say that you'd be able to, you know, if your original motion, all right, you make your original motion.
Yeah.
It's seconded. You guys start talking. Oh, somebody wants to make a motion to amend your motion. That gets a second. There's a vote. Majority amends it. you know, now the flag's, you know,
Okay.
whatever, the second color, you know, and then, you know, Mr. Sheridan, 5 minutes later after discussion, I'd like to make a motion to amend that. I think it should actually be a yellow flag. Somebody agrees, that passes. The motion has kind of evolved out of your hands. You can vote no, but I don't think that after it's been motioned, seconded, amended and seconded, maybe multiple times, that after all these votes, because you don't like how it has evolved, you can pull it. You vote no. If you don't, you know, like what's tended.
Oh, okay, you just vote no, you couldn't remove your motion.
So I don't see how our people would just, I think that would impede the process, just from a, thinking of how often that could happen from a logical standpoint, and just jerk out all the debate that's happened, you know, to where I don't think that would be, I don't think it would be efficient, so I don't think it would probably make sense to necessarily do it that way, but most importantly, because it's been amended and voted on, that's it now, you know, and then the chairman can say, to clarify, you know, when somebody calls for the question, okay, we've got a motion on the floor, it's to have a yellow flag with a rooster, it's whatever the last amended one that was passed was, and then if you don't like how it's evolved, you just vote no, and, you know, you're part of the discussion, and you hope it fails, and then you make another motion, you know.
But you, what if you wanted to be a stinker and just say, you know what, I want to remove my motion, you know, because I don't like the yellow or the blue or the green, you know, I wanted the red, you know.
Right.
What you're saying is once we voted, then it's no longer that person's motion. It's like-
No, it's the motion has kind of a life of its own, and
Okay,
it's too
okay.
late, you know. It's been motioned and seconded to begin with. I wouldn't pull it, but especially after it's
But most of
evolved by having been amended by additional motions to amend the motion.
Most of our amendments, though, are for additions. They're not really taking over the motion. They're for clarifications and
Sure.
or additions. So the original motion is for whatever the resolution is, but then adding wording in or stipulations.
Yeah, and I understand that. I'm just trying to, by way of example, and I understand that the yellow, blue, and red flags with roosters is not what's coming across your
We weren't
dais.
far from that long ago. The signs,
Okay. Clarify.
What was it, the banana?
the banana.
Whether the banana was a sign or a banana?
I have a question, and I'm
Yeah.
not to beat this, you know, and I see scenarios in my head how these things are gonna work. And Deborah, maybe you can help me on this one too. Not to throw Kathy on the spotlight here, but we've had certain instances where we've looked at sites,
Okay,
land development sites, and Kathy has obviously made it known many times that she doesn't prefer smaller lot sizes.
okay.
Okay? I mean, that's, but
We all know that.
it works in the code, you know, it meets the criteria, the developer has our standards set, and he's allowed to build to that density of levels and stuff like that. So, we make a motion to approve. I make it, doesn't matter. Darrell makes it, somebody seconds it, and then, I know Kathy, at times you said, as chairman, you not necessarily make a motion to amend, you can't make the
I
amendment.
can't.
So
Not
you'll,
as
you'll ask, you'll, obviously, during the debate, you make your wishes known, and you ask if someone else can, if someone's willing to make the amendment. So someone else on the board makes the amendment, and then in turn, because she doesn't like, she thinks the lots are too small, can it more opinion at that point, I guess, or it's a preference, I don't know how you want to put it, but even though it meets the criteria, it meets the code, but then all of a sudden the board, you know, votes and says, she convinces 4 other people to go ahead and say, yeah, I don't like the lots either, and we vote on it, you know, at what point are we in a position then that we've just told the developer he can't do what the city says he can do? Does that make sense?
So it's still, you know, you don't like, just to follow the example, you don't like the smaller lot sizes, but you're saying that the lot sizes would be compliant within the code. It's not something
They
that's,
meet the criteria that they fell under for zoning. You know, there isn't anything that would require them that they're not meeting the level of, I don't know.
If I can ask Deborah to clarify, I think the last time this came up, it was a zoning, we were doing a two-part future land use amendment and a zoning amendment. And we were deciding which
Yeah.
zoning classification it would have. And that
So,
determined which
yeah, I
lot
understand, so
size.
it's not,
So in that instance, what it was I believe it was going to low-density residential future land use, and it was going to an R1B, which is a smaller lot size, that's 7,500 square foot lot. They were looking for larger lot sizes, which was the R1, which was 8,500 square feet. So both zoning classifications, they fell under the low-density residential future land use designation. They were both consistent. It was just which zoning classification the board wanted it to go to. We were recommending the smaller lot sizes, but they wanted the larger lot size. So they could, in fact, make a recommendation for anything that's consistent with that low-density residential future land use designation.
Right.
But staff, we had our own recommendation, and the majority of the board sided with staff at that point. But it's nothing unusual for board members to make a recommendation on a different zoning district, as long as it's consistent with the future land use designation.
so,
This last week, though, or last week, we looked at the trees. I mean, if I remember correctly, that they were following the rules about trees and tree removal. They were within there, right? We had to consult in the language that we recommended keeping the heritage trees, and we did things that were, they were doing what they were supposed to do by code, but we felt our own thoughts and things.
we didn't mandate it to them, but we asked them to consider it during their, you know, so the only thing we mandated or requested was that they take out the language that all trees would be removed. So that was,
Even with that left all, remove all the trees, or everything there, the rights that we thought and took out, which was.
If I remember correctly, that was a planned unit development, right? That was a planned unit development?
That was what?
A planned unit development when you all were discussing the trees,
I think so.
right?
no,
No.
that was a SDO. I mean, that
It was just a standard one?
Yeah, that was just a preliminary site plan for the site development order.
Okay.
So I understand what you're saying, so maybe that clarifies what I asked. The original question was that, while your debate in a sense was, I don't like smaller lots, maybe what it should have been focused on was that I don't believe this is an appropriate zoning use for it, maybe we should consider using this zoning, you know,
That's a much better way to say it.
yes. Yeah. Versus, you know, saying that I just think the Catholic Church is beating this developer down.
That's a much better way to put it.
Going there?
Jennifer, when Lonnie was here, he mentioned that if the board has a different recommendation than staff, then they need to just indicate with reasons why they made their choices, why they made the vote that they did.
yes. And I always would, you know, if you're making a motion, it's certainly going to be best whether you're in support of or against staff's recommendation to say, and here's why, A, B, C. I think that's going to, you know, both be, it's just going to be more clear later to everyone, whether it's a recommendation to city council, whether it's, you know, the applicant that wants to know why after they left, even though they heard it, and, you know, they're just mad or elated and forgot some of the discussions. I think that that's a very good thing to have in a motion, to where,
Jennifer, can you talk about motions to continue? I know that's been subject of this board as well.
Yes.
Some of the reasons, I know you've dealt with code enforcement. This board deals a lot with developers, and there are times when the board will have questions of the developer that the developer cannot address.
Right.
And so we try to guide the board with our staff report with some of the answers, but there are some questions that
Yeah.
the developers cannot address, so.
Right. I'm sure things just pop up during the hearing that you all might not have been privy to as staff to have addressed it in the staff report. And if there's something that, the developer, for instance, he's happy to address it, he just doesn't have an answer for you now, and you as a board feel that that's something upon which you should be basing your decision, then I would say that it is okay to make a motion to continue the hearing. I think that when I've dealt with code enforcement boards in the past, that's kind of a different arena as far as people are just sometimes they want to buy time or whatever, and or if they said, oh, well, let me tell you about this, I'll find out, I'll get the information to you. First of all, people wouldn't show up at the next continued hearing, the respondent sometimes, or, say you five, if you were code enforcement, were there, on January 1, and it gets continued to February 1. You four are there, you three couldn't make it. Then there would have been all this evidence split. So that's twofold. If you're a board where a lot of you are always present all the time anyways, and in fairness to the developer that's, making his application for whatever it is that's coming before you, they've probably done a lot to get here and actually submit their application, and chances are they've worked with staff a lot. But things are going to pop up to where they're not going to have an answer for you. They can't, they don't have a crystal ball to know every question that they're going to be asked to necessarily have the information, or they might have to go get a report from somebody about it. To where if it's going to really be a linchpin in your decision-making process, and that's information that they have to get, I would certainly, I would very much consider continuing the hearing in fairness to give them a chance to actually provide you the information that they would like to. Does that help address? Okay. As far as, just wanted to mention, because I had just to touch on real quick, if you're giving reasons, here we want, whether you're making a motion to grant or deny ABC, whatever the particular thing that's before you, and you're basing it on being supported by the staff report, I would mention that. Or if something, let me slow down, I've got a million things running through my head that I want to spit out, and I'm going too fast. If you're saying that you want to adopt the staff report or the staff's recommendations, I would mention that in your motion, where you say, I move to grant, the whatever it is, because the evidence supports the staff's report and recommendation dated, and then note the staff report, if they have a staff report that they've submitted to you in its entirety. Because then you're saying, look, here's my motion, I want to do this, and here's why, because it's supported by staff's entire report, and then you've got the staff report kind of enveloped within what you're sending up with your recommendation, to where the city council can rely on looking at that as support for your, as a board's recommendation to them. And if you're, any time that you're making a motion, and if you're applying an ordinance, certain things that you're supposed to be looking at, certainly feel free to include that as evidence of support for your granting that motion to recommend to city council, or as support for the fact that you don't want to recommend a certain thing. And that's always a really great idea. Some of the easiest ways to bolster your arguments are certainly citing staff reports and ordinances and things that are required of the particular applicant. So that's always a solid way to make a motion too. Okay, just as far as, I know you guys have a lot of questions about the amending motions and things like that. Do you have any other general questions before I kind of charge through things? And some of it I can read, but I'm not going to bore you by standing up here and reading to you what I've handed out to you. You know, because I'll lose you.
Most of my, things were our amending process, I think is where we run into problems at times.
Okay. And certainly, I'm available, by phone or email if you all, as a board, realize, oh, wait, we should have asked her about this, or I wonder if we could get some examples on this, whether it's, direct motions to be made. I certainly am happy to look into drafting those and supplying something that you can tailor more to your needs, obviously, depending on what comes before you. But I certainly came prepared to give a very general overview of the parliamentary procedure, so I don't have, example motions pertinent to what you would have necessarily before you. I just wanted to touch on procedurally issues, especially concerning the amendment of motions, because I had heard that that was something to be addressed.
Does anyone have any other specific questions?
Deborah, should I go on or shut it down? Because I passed out the stuff and I don't want to just... Oh, I didn't realize that either.
Yeah.
Okay, well then if there aren't any questions, I'll just close it down. And again, certainly feel free if you want to email me. If you happen to want to write my email on your thing, I could say it out loud real quick so everybody has it. I won't feel offended if you're not moving your pen or something. But it's JB Nix, J as in Jennifer, B as in Barrington, N as in Nancy, IX at Stenstrom, which is STEN as in Nancy, STROM as in mouse.com. And I'm happy to follow up with anything that anyone would have. So I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, I think it was.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
Good.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the LDC approval process and standards. Ms. Pierre?
Hey.
This is your third work session, so this one is going to be about approval process and parking. And I'm going to turn it over to
Madam Chair, can we take a quick break real quick?
I'm sorry?
Can we take a quick break?
Absolutely. 5 minutes?
5 minutes?
We'll stand in recess.
We didn't vote on it.
Requirements that we are revising in our land development code review. We'll have a brief overview of the process of the land development code, talk about the approval process, parking, and then I'll give an update of the visual preference survey, how it's going on, and open for discussion. We have several goals with the land development code review. One is to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. So that's, we have a lot of policies in the comprehensive plan that are not now addressed in the land development code. So we have to make our code compliant. We also want to be compliant with the strategic plan, and our strategic plan wants to have more commercial development in the city, so we have to also make the land development code more economic friendly. We also wanted to incorporate a form-based code element in the code, and we discussed that. Another goal would be to revise the architectural guidelines. There was a direction from City Council. We are also addressing that. And the approval process is also part of our revision. And there are a set of standards that we need to revise. We are not going to be able to discuss all of them in the work sessions, but we're trying to pick the most controversial ones and the ones that have more, that would trigger more discussion to come and present to you. The approval process revision, we distributed, I sent to you the table with the existing process. I don't know if you all have a chance to look at. And I also sent the table with the same, all the applications with a blank field for you to suggest a different process if that was the case. And we're going to go through that. We also need to revise the impact fees, and that's also an undergoing process. Today we started discussion about the application fees, and we have now a consultant that is going to work with us, and he's going to update a survey that was done comparing our fees with neighboring cities to see how we stand in that regard. We are also using a report that was done by a consultant in 2010 that looked at our development review process and made some recommendations. Some of them were already adopted by the city. Some we are still in the process, so I'm going to tackle that. Councilmember Britton asked us to check best practices around the region, and he mentioned the city of Longwood. So we're going to talk about quickly the process that Longwood and Sanford copied Longwood, so they have the same process, and it's a process that the developer reaches out to the community for every development very early in the process. I'm going to talk about that. And then we want to propose a small-scale site plan. That's something that we don't have right now. And also how to address the architectural review process in a way that any deviation or any variance would come to the boards. So we will discuss that. So this is the process, and you have all the application types and what is the process. So R would be recommending body, A would be approving body, PH would be public hearing, and this is how it is right now. We have discussed internally, we don't have yet our final proposal because we want to hear from you. We already presented this work session for City Council. This time we had to invert the order. And we have, and we'll tell you the directions that City Council gave to us. So right now in this first part of the application process, because the list is long and is divided in 3 here, the only thing we would recommend would be to remove the step where annexation petition goes to GRC. Usually annexation is not an issue. The issue comes with the comprehensive plan amendment and the zoning map amendment. So we thought that we could skip that process. We are trying to streamline the process and bring to the board things that are really necessary to bring to the board. The other thing that we also want to stress that we need to consider is that we are understaffed. So we need to really tackle things that are important for you to see, and taking into consideration that bringing to the boards require, memos and reports to be done. So we have to be realistic to what we can do. But we want to bring whatever is important, you consider is important to be brought to the board. Special event permit requiring policy decision, that's something that is not required anymore because it will only have special event permit. Now we have an ordinance that stipulates what are the situations in which the city can waive fees for special permit. So that would disappear. And we want to discuss deviations. When we discussed with City Council, the direction we had from City Council was that they would like to reduce the deviation that staff can approve to 5%. In the same meeting, they were very clear to stress that they don't want to see all types of deviations. And they gave examples of setbacks and boat docks that they don't want to be involved with that. So because we didn't have our proposal yet, we were trying to get the direction. We are trying to compose a proposal in which we separate deviations. So here you have site development orders, for instance, deviation less than 10% is approved by land use administrator. That means it involves all types of deviations. Now we want to separate different types of deviations. Who has the power or more control over it? That would be one proposal. So these areas in yellow are areas that staff is considering to make changes. So again, all the different types of projects that would require deviations. We can come back to that because I imagine that this would be the area that you would have suggestions. When we were talking about deviations, we decided to see what was the history of the city in the last years. So we analyzed all the deviations that were processed by the city from 2006 up to now. We had 119 deviations that we had to go through. Most of them, and that chart on top shows the distribution, how they are broken down. The majority comes from setbacks. And you can see here, setbacks are here. They range from very close to zero, right, to 40% would be the maximum here. And we have one big peak here. And those big peaks are related to Ouvido on the Park. Ouvido on the Park required special, conditions. So we have, for instance, signage that has more than 200% deviation. This is not really something that we see on a daily basis. And that was approved by the city manager. Because Ouvido on the Park has special conditions that is approved by land use administrator. So setbacks would be the first, the majority of our deviations. Then we had buffer yard would be the second one. Then parking, and then you have all the other types of deviations. So we are trying to see what has been the history to inform us two things. First, what can we adjust in the revision of the code, the standards itself, to get rid of some of the deviations. So, for instance, boat docks, we have had 10 deviations in the last years, a couple of years, and they range to a maximum of 20%, and they have all been approved. It's the same type of, usually it's one contractor that comes, and he's the one that does all the boat docks, and he requires usually the same amount of deviation, and it's granted. So we are considering isn't it time to revise our code, and we have to analyze the type of deviation that he's requiring, but we are also trying to get from these analysis what can we incorporate in the code that would make the process easier and more streamlined. So that's one thing that we are considering. Then we looked at the report that was done by the consultant, and he had some interesting recommendations. As to improve the resubmittal process, the report suggested that the deadlines for resubmittals would be decreased to 15 days. That was something that the city wanted to have, but because we are understaffed, we cannot meet that deadline. So we have been using the 28 days for the first and second and third resubmittals. We are reevaluating the approval fees, so that's something that was recommended and we are doing now. As to how to improve communication, we are updating the development review process handbook and also the forms. We are requiring the developers to come to the board and present to the board. We want to make it clear in the forms, in the application forms, that they have to do that. We are also requiring for the architectural review process, we are requiring that they present the board with the materials so that we have, a better feeling and of what they want to achieve with the project. So we are doing that. The report also recommended having a campaign, a public relations campaign with developers and inviting them to come to open houses, and so that's something that we can consider. And use your Oviedo Crossroad newsletter for community outreach. The visual preference survey that is going on right now has been having a very positive feedback from the community, thanking the fact that we are reaching out, that we are asking for their opinion. So I think that's a good route to take. The other thing that the report recommended would be to request an alternate to attend the pre-apps. Again, that's something that we have been trying to make sure that all departments are represented in the pre-apps meetings that we have with developers. Sometimes that's not possible, again, because of staff. We have, for instance, only one fire marshal in the city. If she misses the pre-apps, we cannot replace her. To facilitate small business and redevelopment, we want to, that is one of the proposals we have, to amend the Land Development Code to accommodate small and redevelopment projects. Right now, we request for any development, if you have a Walmart coming to the city, we request the same kind, we have the same kind of standards, requirements, and fees than we require from a small business coming to the city. And that is just, not very friendly to small businesses. So we have to revise that when we are trying to correct that. As to personnel, the report raises the issue of the need for in-house environmental and transportation specialists. That's something we don't have. We hire consultants to do the reports for all the zoning map amendments, the CPAs, whenever it's required to have a report from a specialist. That's something that is still the city can tackle in the future. Invest in additional education, certification, and promote internal cross-training of employees. That's something that the city has been doing in a way or another. Then we looked at the city of Longwood and Sanford. They have this a program which is called CAP, which is Citizen Awareness and Participation Plan. And what it does is that they require from the developer to, very early in the process, to reach out to the community and explain what they want to do with the site. So they have to, they have a ratio of an area that they have to reach out, neighboring communities around the development. And it is requested from the development process that they present a plan of how they're going to reach out for the community. And the idea is really to create a good neighboring, approach. That I would come to you, explain the project to you, and the issues that will be raised, maybe we can solve, within the process. It's really to open a dialogue between the applicant and affected communities. It also informs the city what are the issues that may be raised in a public hearing later on. So we called, these are the steps. So they would have to prepare a citizen participation plan, which is a written plan that has to be approved and reviewed by staff, and then they have to implement the plan, and then later on they have to report what happened when they implemented the plan. So they have to present a written report, and that will be reviewed and approved by staff and will be presented to the boards later on. I called both cities to see what were the feedback, and Longwood has been using this plan for 10 years, and they both were very positive about the application of the CAP. Longwood stated that it's very helpful for big projects. It's a great way to know problems early on, and applies to major site plans, and for minor plans only at the discretion of the community development director. And what they raised was that the downside of it is that it has not triggered a great turnout of lately, and because they haven't had major projects, and usually it's related to major projects. Sanford was very positive about its application. It has been adopted the CAP for the last 5 years. They stressed an interesting point, that it's not necessary to reach consensus. This is not a process that they require to reach consensus. The idea is really to raise the issues early on and to address the issues the best way they can. So it would be a great way to provide the board members, city council members, an informed decision-making. What is the feeling and the perception of the community? And that was something that when we presented to city council, it was not clear if the city wants to take that route or not. So we are still trying to not copy their model, but trying to learn from them and maybe customize it to our process. As to small-scale site plan review, we have kind of consensus within the staff that we need to offer that option. We need to encourage small businesses and redevelopment in the city. And we want to approach it in 3 different ways. We discussed today with John Jones that is going to do the review of the approval fees, that we would have 3 categories: new developments, redevelopment, and change of use. And particularly change of use, you have sometimes a small, a building already existing in the city, a person that comes and wants to change the use of that building. And when we tell them all the requirements that our land development code, requires, the person just walks away because it's too expensive and it's too much work really for a change of use. So what we want to analyze what would be the criteria to allow for a smoother process. So for new developments, we think size would be a good criteria, because if it's a new development, you need to require, the transformation of that site to fit whatever the final use will be. Redevelopment, also size, and then the benefits would be reduced fee and maybe a simplified process, and we are analyzing that. For new developments, it will be just reduced fee. And change of use, we want to cross size and the impact to see in which way we can not only reduce fees, but also simplify the process so that we have more, we invite more people to come and use our existing, buildings that are vacant or they are not doing well. As to architectural review process, which is the other big theme, for us, we want to improve clarity, consistency, and predictability, and we want to improve community character. That's something that it's important for the city, and City Council has been very clear about that. So we are requesting, the board to be presented to us. We are also considering to require a perspective, a 3D perspective for larger projects or specific projects. And we had the case of not Family Dollar, Dollar General, that people could not understand the entrance because the way it was presented in a plan, not in a perspective, way, did not show that it was in a diagonal. You have to see the floor plan and the facades to understand the project. So that would be something that would clarify, what the final result would be. And we are also considering, and that's where we are starting to break the deviations into types of deviations, because we are considering there are two different types of deviations. Those that affect community character, that maybe the boards are more interested in looking at, and those which are more of technical nature, like setbacks and boat docks and fences, which do not have an impact on the community character. So that's an idea that we want to discuss with you. So for instance, for architectural review, we are defending that any deviation would go to the boards, because we want to improve the architectural result of the city. The city wants to improve the bar to the architectural standards. So any deviation to that would go to the boards. So, and these were the options that we considered. Improve architectural standards is a given. We will do that in any way. But we can do that and not change the process. We can create an architectural review board, which will be, a more radical way, but it would, we could do that. City Council didn't want that route, did not support that. Or we could change the process and make the deviations come to the boards. And that would be any deviation. So these are our initial proposals. So we haven't really consolidated what would be our suggestions, because we want to hear from all the boards. Analyze deviations per type, increase staff's flexibility as to technical standards deviations, so all those setbacks and fences and boat docks, and any deviation affecting community character would come straight to the boards. Distinguish between small and large impact developments, and try to streamline the approval process. Now, we can stop here or moving to the end, and then we discuss at the end. These are the standards that need revision. So parking is the one that we can discuss now. Zoning districts, the mixed use is another one. Accessory units, I think we will try to discuss that in the end in the last work session, because that has some controversial issues related to it. Revision of permissible use is something that we have to do. Townhouse standards, again, we are doing that, but we don't, probably we're not bringing that to you unless you find it as an issue. Condominium, or workforce housing, and open space requirements. These are all types of standards that we are in the process of revising. Now, parking is a big one, and that's why we want to discuss with you, because especially for the form-based code area, we need to change a little bit the way that we approach parking. Made for Walking Context is the name of the book, and what the book emphasizes that for one parking, for one P, you have to address 5 Ds, which is diversity, density, design, distance to transit, and destination accessibility. So there's a lot related to parking that we have to consider. The challenge for us is how to manage parking in a transitioning mode, when, especially for the areas that we want to be more urban, and we don't want to do that for the whole city, but for the form-based code area, for the gateways, for the corridors, we are trying to approach a more urban environment. And for that, there is this transition, and how do we deal with the transition? That's the challenge. And one of the things that we have to consider is that instead of establishing parking requirements, we have to see parking as part of a bigger context. So it has to be a parking management. Instead of thinking about parking requirements per lot, we have to consider at the block level, shared parking. That's the kind of thing in a more urban environment. That's how we would approach, parking. So in areas that we want to stimulate walking, in the form-based code, for instance, we may need to establish maximum parking requirements. So we will have, nowadays we only have minimum, but and many cities are doing that, are also establishing maximum, parking requirements. And why? Because there are environmental issues connected to parking. There is not only when you increase the impervious surface related to parking, you are also increasing the cost of dealing with the pollution, with the runoff. So that's one consideration. It affects the urban design. If you allow a lot of parking, it will not be conducive to pedestrian friendly. So that's something that we need to take into consideration. If you allow easy parking, you always have an issue with funding transit. If you have free and in access parking spaces, you never have really the need to search for other modes of transportation. So that's one consideration. Excessive parking results in more space than demand and in wasted space. And mixed use is a good counter act for that, because mixed use, because you have this idea of different uses together, the times you use that particular building or development varies. So it's more conducive to shared parking along the day. The other consideration is that we have to provide bicycle parking. We already do that in our land development code, but we have to extend that. And then establish the minimum and maximum parking. And a lot of cities are going that route to areas that they want to stimulate pedestrian. And the maximum can be a ratio of an area, can be X times the minimum requirements or standard, or it can be a maximum overall for a geographic area. So we established that whole section of the city, like Oviedo in the Park, would have a maximum of X, parking spaces. So that's something that we are considering. And To wrap up, what are the, the updates? The visual preference survey is going, is online since July 1st. We have, in the afternoon I checked today, we had 297 respondents, and 93 people left comments, written comments, because in the end you can leave some comments. And most of them are very positive. One or two didn't like the survey, but most of the people are really giving their opinion, and a lot of people thanking the city to reach out to them. So it has been very positive. We'll want to do a wrap-up session in September. The survey will be going on until September 1st. So we had 2 months, a window of 2 months, and we will do a wrap-up session. We will present the results. And especially for the comments, I will copy all the comments for you and for the city council members, because it's really nice to see, it goes in several directions, but there are a lot of very interesting comments and ideas that people are really taking the time to write and address the city. We want to discuss accessory dwelling units because there are issues related to them. There has been demand for that in the city, but we have to see in which way it would work for the city of Oviedo. Signs, we have to come back with signs, and city council, when they heard that, they were not very happy, but especially there were issues with flags, and we have been working with Lonnie to really work out, what are the differences, how we differentiate flags from attention-getting devices. We have now a good, solid, I think, proposal we want to present to you and to council members. And then any additional items that you think it would be interesting for you and for us to discuss, we are still open to, to include in our next work session. And with that, we are open to your questions and comments and the directions that you would like us to go.
Thank you. Are there questions, comments?
I'm sure.
Mr. Wright?
Just a couple. So, sure. The small-scale site plan stuff, is there a threshold you guys were looking at as far as acreage, square footage that you were trying to look at for developing a small-scale site plan review?
We haven't discussed the threshold yet. The city has already, in the past, the city had a small-scale site plan. But we discussed today, we started today with John Jones talking how we would approach that. So we had some ideas, and it would be a mixture of the square footage with the impact, with the type of use. But I think square footage would be a good starting point to establish. We have to see, I think, an analysis of what have been the site plans that we have been processed, being approved, to see what would be the best, threshold for the city. But,
second question is, you talked about the deviations. Obviously, I see that. How does that affect our board? I mean, when it was revised 5 years ago, 6 years ago, to allow staff to get more approval rights, so it didn't come to the boards. Higher ends came. Our board basically, unless it's 30% or 20, I forget what it is. It limited what we did anymore. Now, if I was correct, you said they're reducing
well, City
staff's
Council
ability to reducing the percentage?
City Council mentioned that they would like, and actually it was the mayor who proposed that, to reduce from 10, nowadays it's 10% that staff can approve, to 5%. But then when he, and it was an open discussion, we would sit in a work session mode, so it was more like back and forth. And many of them said, no, we don't want to see all of those boat docks, all of those setbacks. So although we have that direction, we also have the direction that they don't want to see everything. So that's why we started to say, okay, so.
Was it, again, was it discussed to, again, years past and other previous boards, where those boards had, instead of recommending approval, they had, or recommending, they had approval points, of straighting the deviation so that whether our board per se would just have approval rights of up to a certain percentage, so city council wouldn't have to see it, that kind of stuff. Has that been discussed at all, or is it, or are they
It
still
has not,
basically
but
trying to take more,
we-
reduce our roles more?
No, we have actually started talking about certain deviations instead of it going to council, like the boat docks, if it's over 30%, over 20%, actually 21% and up. We've talked about it just going straight to PZA and not going any further. So some of the deviations that you don't see, you will probably see today, well, once the code is revised. But some of them you don't see today. So and the reason why we brought the process tonight as a work session is so that you all can determine as a board what items you all would like to see. So we're looking for your recommendation as well. Teresa, you may want to go back to that chart.
The charts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you all have a hard copy of that chart? You don't have a hard copy?
The one that we had that showed different breakouts, I think we got sent that, at least I know I looked at it, but I don't think we have the one that kind of highlights the highlighted.
The yellow, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we didn't want to influence. We wanted to show what is the approval process, the current process, and then the blank table so that you could fill with whatever suggestions you might have.
Personally, doing this as long as I have, it's, I kind of always felt that a lot of the stuff that we approved in the past, whether it was a different iteration of a board or even the PZA, that was kind of taken out of our hands and put into staff's hands. From what I'm hearing is now, because the accounting staff is reduced, you guys are struggling to do that kind of stuff, and at times I look at, we wonder if we're gonna have a next meeting per se for agenda items, so, I don't necessarily think that putting more of that approval process in our hands is a bad thing. It's my opinion, but, where I find it difficult, and I'll use the example, is last week, or last 2 weeks ago, our whole decision being made last week was based on, or 2 weeks, I say last week, but, was on a deviation. And, that deviation, as much as we argued, or debated whether it was actually even the correct number, the only reason we even saw it, I think, was because of the deviation. Or, no, it was a PSP, so it had to come here anyway. But the, otherwise we don't have the opportunity to really drill into stuff like that, So we, as far as I'm concerned, as a board, we've lost some of our ability to see a lot of the stuff that goes through. So I wouldn't mind seeing, more stuff come to us at a, instead of the higher range of deviation, that mid-range stuff, whether it is the 5 to 15, whatever, you guys decide that, would actually give us approval rights, so it didn't have to go to council. We are the final determining board, or, that some of the other stuff would actually come to us for review, in a sense, whether it's site development, whatnot, so.
Yeah, our proposal so far has been that everything that has community character, that is affecting community character, and that would be architecture and signage that has, a more impact, would come to you and to City Council. This is a proposal, right? Because we think that has an impact on the way the city is being perceived, and and it's the character of the city. So, but if you want to also propose any other deviations, or if it's the range of deviations that you want to discuss, I mean, that's also, if you want to, because City Council was clear that they don't want to see everything. Although they proposed a reduction, then they realized that they would have, much more on their plate. They said, no, actually, we don't want to see the small, the more technical stuff like setbacks and bulldogs. We don't want to see that. We will revise the code so that the intent is to have less deviations, right? Is to have a land development code that is more streamlined, is more in line with what developers want, but deviations will always have a place, because there's always one situation that does not really meet the
In previous iterations of the board, whether they were the original BOA, the LPA, PZA as it stands now, they always had approving, again, I keep going back to that, we approved, there was actually site plan approval that ended at the LPA. I think it even ended at the PZA originally in its original intent. And it was a number of years back that council decided to pull a lot of that stuff away from the individual boards and either put it in their own hands or land use administrators. So what I'm hearing is that staff is understaffed in a sense. Council doesn't want to see it, so to me it makes more sense that you would put back stuff on us as an approving board, whether it's, again, you're trying to streamline the process, but, and that's what I was asking about the small scale site plans. If those ended at us from DRC and didn't have to go to council, that would remove the task at that point, and that's what we used to do before.
That would be.
Okay, I'm going to go over, because there's a lot of stuff that's up there, and I don't know and I'm going to address your concerns as well. So if you look at that table here, you'll see comprehensive plan amendments, land development code, and amendments of official zoning map. Comprehensive plans, by statute, you all are a recommending body. Land development code, by statute, you all are a recommending body. City council is the final determining body. Same thing with official zoning map. Then you have annexation petitions. Annexation petitions are only required to be considered by City Council. It does not, we can add additional bodies to that annexation, but right now it's just DRC that's a recommending body, and we are proposing to eliminate DRC since it really does not, the DRC, some of the members on there, like, why are we seeing annexation petitions? There's nothing for us to consider. Either you annex it or not. So we look at it as staff to see if there are any enclaves. If it's contiguous, it doesn't create any enclaves, then we recommend approval of it. Then you look at the appeals. All the appeals are there, which it just depends on who they're appealing the decision of. Then you have the DRI, which is the Development of Regional Impact, and you all are a recommending body of that. And then you have the planned unit development with statutory development agreement, and you all are a recommending body of that as well. You have the planned unit developments with this non-statutory development agreement, you all are a recommending body. Non-statutory development agreement, you'll see that you all are a recommending body. All of these you all are a recommending body. And then you go to the next page, preliminary subdivision plans, which is what you all saw at your last meeting a couple weeks ago. That is, you are a recommending body. The final plat, the DRC, it goes from after the preliminary subdivision, then you have the final plat. The final plat is reviewed by the DRC, which they are a recommending body, and then City Council is the approving body. Now, you all can talk in between to let me know if this is something that you all as a body want to be a recommending body on.
I'm sorry, Deborah, my recollection is that's the one thing that council took away from PZA a few years ago, the 21 to 30%, because it goes from DRC straight to council.
What you're talking about is a deviation. This is a final plat, like your subdivision plan that you all reviewed last meeting. You all asked what was the next step, and would you all see it again? The next step is the final plat, and that's where they come with their plat. Our surveyor will review the plat, our city attorney reviews the plat, and then the plat should be based on that preliminary subdivision plans, and that's where they get into the details of the lot sizes, and they have the measurement of the lot sizes on the plat.
The easements,
The
yeah.
easements, everything that needs to be recorded, they would have all their documentation. That is something that you all are not a reviewer of. You all can be a recommending body if you want on that one. You have a non-statutory subdivision. Were you going to say something, Mr. Pollard?
Yeah, I don't see why an item would go straight from the DRC to the city council. I mean, I would think that anything going to city council would, and if it originated with the DRC, it would flow through us and go to city council. I wouldn't, skipping PZA for an item, I don't understand that process. I mean, you would think there's kind of levels in DRC, PZA, and then city council. Does that make sense? I mean, either it's originated at city council, for an approval, or it goes from PZA to city council. I mean, it's how I would think it would be better served.
The way the code was written, it was written so that it encouraged economic development. So the way that it was written, and Ms. Moore will remember Charlie Seaman, and it was the Downtown Master Plan Committee. And what they decided was if you are compliant with the code, then you are approved. You're presumed approved. So that way it would be staff who would approve it. If there are any deviations from our code, staff could approve the way that the code is written today up to 10%. Up to 10%, they would still have to provide a justification on their deviation and provide mitigation for it. But if it's less than 10%, then it would be staff level approval. 11% to 20% would be development review committee. So it was, and anything more than that would go to city council for site development. Building permits, after DRC, it would go to PZA. After the 21% to 30%, it goes to PZA. But the intent was, it was to provide for economic development. And if you met all the code requirements, because they beefed up the code from what it previously was in terms of the criteria and the requirements, then you were presumed approved. And that, if you talk to any developer, goes a long way with them developing in Oviedo, because they know if they meet the code, they don't have to go through any boards. And then it also alleviates staff from writing staff reports. So to go back to your issue, if it goes before DRC and then it skips PZA, it was just a step in back then in reducing the staff reports, I would imagine. But it makes sense. I mean, if the board would like for it to go before PZA, then I would suggest that you all make that recommendation on that.
I mean, you provide staff reports to the DRC, correct?
We do provide, and then it provides, and another thing is that because if it goes before PZA, then it adds time to the developer's project. But we're in the process of amending the code, so if it's something that the board would like to consider, then I would make that recommendation if I were the board.
I mean, you could originate some of them at the PZA level instead of the DRC level. It has to go to city council and you want to eliminate some of the time frames. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to skip the PZA, go straight from DRC to city council, you know, originate it maybe in PZA and go to city council, or have, you know, PZA be the final approval on some of the stuff. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to have those breaks and have, you know, recommendation go straight.
How critical is the DRC's recommendation in your decision?
I don't think we've really taken some of it into consideration.
Can
a
you
lot of
sit?
times. Oh, I'm sorry. Sometimes we don't even take them into consideration, at least from my experience, you know, being on here the short term that I've been. I mean, I think we all put in our own point of view on the issues at hand. You know, and I want to add one more thing to what Ms. Pollack was saying. You were saying that, you know, the intent was to make life easier for developers with the current code writing. And I respectfully argue that point with you, because we're known in the community of Orlando and Florida to be one of the hardest cities to build in. So there's a disconnect somewhere, and I'm sorry to say that. So no disrespect to you and no disrespect to Brian Cobb, but something has to give. And maybe it is letting everything come to us and pushing it faster. I don't know. I mean, the way I look at this, and I made the comment to Bob, this was just to get rid of this board, is the way I looked at it. That's the way I look.
Madam Chair, so I guess are we formal? Deborah, I guess what I was looking at is there are certain, especially in this highlighted area, you know, and I think it goes back to that 22 to 30% deviation range, and there's a couple there highlighted, you know, where it goes from DRC as a recommending board to city council, but, you know, if it went from recommending to PZA as approval, then it went out of council's hand, you know, to me, that would be the logical approach, you know, to doing that. So you're not necessarily doing any more work preparation other than it's just coming to us and it's not going to council. So that they're, you know, not necessarily that I want to be the recommending board on a 21% deviation, but I think we should be the approving board at that point. And it would reduce, you know, again, and if I'm not mistaken, you said even a lot of those boat docks were in that 20 percentile range, you know, while you're looking at changing the code maybe to cover all those, you know, but you may not be able to cover everything, and those things in that range then could be approval boards for this board, or approvals for this board, sorry. Like the one that's up at the top there, the special event permitting, policy decision. As a policy decision, does that have to be council, or can that be us as approval board?
The one with the policy decision, for the special events, it's mostly been fee waivers. And with fee waivers, we did a separate ordinance earlier this year that spelled out what fees can be waived. So we had a lot of developers who wanted their application fees waived. We had a lot of special event applicants who wanted their fees waived. Some of them were private, nonprofit. It just varied. So City Council directed staff to come up with an ordinance spelling out what fees can be waived and who can get their fees waived. So we did that, and that situation has been taken care of. So special event applications no longer go to City Council.
Okay.
So that's
Disappear, that whole
something
line
that
will
just needs to be
disappear.
deleted.
Yeah, that's what I'm again, just looking, I'm looking at the, you know, the areas where, in a sense, like you said, for expediting the process, they've gone past from DRC to council, but, you know, it could be easily just go from DRC to PCA, approval, end of story. And
Or
then
it can
doesn't
just go to PZA and not, instead
Or
of
just go to
DRC.
PZA, yes,
Right,
you know.
yeah.
And I keep going back to the previous meeting that we had, because, and obviously as long as I dragged it out, you can tell I was irritated, is the fact that, you know, everything, the developer basically brought in a cartoon of a site that didn't work. Obviously I couldn't present it, but I ran the numbers on that deviation and it didn't work. And he didn't, at staff level, at DRC level, at and even I came in and talked to Genevieve, asking them to bring the information, which they couldn't at the time because of time constraints. They couldn't justify, they couldn't bring in the information that we needed. You know, if there was a time to continue something, that was probably it. But the problem is that we see all these, we question all this stuff, and we never see it again. Everything that we questioned was basically answered by, well, it'll be taken care of at final engineering. It'll be resolved at final engineering. So it was difficult for me not to be miffed in a sense that we really didn't have any say. You know, I mean, you asked, does DRC for me, yes, it does make a difference, you know, whether they approve or not. More so for me is the conditions that they put on it. You know, not necessarily whether they say we recommend approval to the council, but it's more what they looked at with the things that they found wrong. In a sense, in the things that I found wrong with the site, and Bob as well, you know, just simple things, they weren't in there. So when I saw all that, and there was nothing in conditions on those kind of questions of the access to the site, you know, having the one model home with no available parking against three on the other. To me, that's when DRC's decision at that point, I blow it off. I ignore it because I don't think they really addressed, you know, it was too easy just to say, well, we'll take care of it, let staff take care of it later on at final engineering. Let's just move this through. And I do echo what you said, is that when they made a lot of the changes where we don't see or have input into the design process or the review process of final engineering, how lots are laid out, that kind of stuff. Yes, I did see that as they basically removed us, you know, so that we really only met the minimum requirements of the board that they have to have for their comp plan. And that basically is they have to have an agency that reviews land development, the other stuff, the land development code, comp plan amendments, and that kind of stuff. So to me, it looks like now it's an opportunity for staff not being at full size anymore or reduced staff from where they were 5 years ago, council not wanting to deal with a lot of the minor stuff. Well, you have a board that half the time we don't even worry if we have a meeting or we have one agenda item. Tonight, we wouldn't have had a meeting if we didn't have a work session. All we did was approve our minutes tonight. So there's opportunities there for us to be able to fill in the gaps. And again, where I was just looking at the sheet, I'm looking at things that, you know, is there anything in the A column on city council that blank on our column that can be moved over to the left? You know?
And that's going to be some of the items that City Council no longer wants to review. Those are the items that we're going to send to this board. And that would be like the boat docks, your setbacks, things of that nature, where deviation is too large for DRC, but it needs to have an approval agency, so it would be the PZA. And then if there are any other things up there that you all would like to be a reviewing body, let us know. We need to get more specific into the types of applications, so that way we know what this board would like to review.
Ms. Hughes?
That's a very good question about, do we use the DRC's information that they recommend? I'm curious, is there any statistic that we have about council and our recommendations? So the work that we do as a recommending board versus an approving board, saying that the council, what is the turnover rate or the acceptance rate of our recommendations?
I would say that it's high. It's pretty high in terms of because what we do is when you all make a recommendation and we agree with it, which is most of the time, we will incorporate it into the site, into whatever it is, whatever order it is that we are taking forward to City Council. So your recommendations will be included, and so what City Council will approve is what the DRC, PZA have already recommended. So it's pretty high. I think the last time City Council did not adopt everything, I believe it was a special exception use order. It was a couple of years ago. And Catherine Townsend was on the board at that time. And I don't know, I can't remember how long ago that was. It's been a couple years.
It's been a few years.
Yeah.
McNamara project that caused all the furlough, didn't it?
That was the site development.
Was it a
For the
site
special
development?
exception.
Okay, so
There
it
was
was a
one
site
that
development.
basically then they started listening to our conversations and we were,
when things got taken away from PZA.
Exactly. We were punished.
If you would like to review the table and send to us with your, suggestions, that would be also, a way to do, because then we would have,
Can you
the
send
rec,
each one of us these slides, those?
with the yellow? Okay, because,
Just do a digital email, and it's easier
Yeah.
that way,
okay.
rather than hard
Yeah,
copy.
email's
Yeah,
fine.
okay.
I did.
Yeah, yesterday we sent the table, but not with the yellow. So you have, did you?
I'll double check.
I couldn't, I didn't see it.
I didn't see it, but I'll double check. I just- yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to just tell you what some of these words mean. Like the SDO is going to be the site development order, and private projects are the private developers. The SDO, the city project,
I'm sorry.
it's okay, it's okay. The SDO would be the site development order with the city projects. Those are the projects that are initiated by the city, and some of which would be like parks and recreation buildings, or city halls, or public works administration buildings, those type of things. Teresa, can you flip the next screen? Teresa, can you flip it to the next one? Because there's some
Sure.
things that says BP on it that or DP. So, in the yellow, you'll see BP. Those are building permits. So anything related to like single-family homes, it's building permits / other development permits. Other development permits could be like the non-statutory subdivisions, which is considered lot splits. Those things which are not site development orders, they're just other items that could be considered a development permit. And then you have building permits for city projects, and those are, again, city developments. And then you have building permits and other development permits in the new downtown zoning district. And in that instance, which is not highlighted, the land use administrator is the final approving authority on everything, including deviations. So there's no limit on the deviations that the land use administrator can approve in the new downtown.
So for the new downtown and any city project, it never comes to this board.
No, right.
But New Downtown does not go to any board, right? It's only,
If you have questions on the table when you're going through it, you can give us a call or email us.
we just included in this one, and I can send you this last one, because it has eminent domain that the one that I sent to you didn't have, and we noted that that was missing, so we included eminent domain here.
And eminent domain is approved by the land use administrator as well.
Yeah, and they can, the land use administrator can refer to DRC. That's why it's a approved land use administrator or DRC, because
Just wanted to have the board consider, and definitely as we're beginning planning, the maximum parking space option, right? I expect that it goes towards the high walk focus of this new code, but for business owners, there are a lot of business owners that do not get leases, and I've watched people have to move from buildings because of parking access. Clients or their customers couldn't find adequate parking, had to go elsewhere where somebody really could drive in. So I know we're saying we really kind of attract business owners, and I watched 3 developments in Orlando go with this new model, we go to the walking frontage, and people do not lease them, people lease them because people do not lease based on parking availability. So just to keep in mind those things.
Can I ask for clarification of that. Are you saying that because there's fewer parking available, then some folks won't lease in a building and will go somewhere else because their customers have no place to park? Okay. I want to make sure I understood what you were saying.
I mean, we've even tried to fill some spaces, beautiful buildings, or places combined ones where there are lofts on top and condos on top of businesses on bottom. And the business say, I don't have to do the rent there, but there's street side parking, and covered parking spots in the back, and kind of business buying the front, bodies in the building. And that's not adequate. If one person's parked out there, or something, condos parked out there, we've lost that spot, and that's not stay. Or they try those businesses, and customers don't come, they would have other options. Unless it's a destination spot, they have to make it there, and there's other options. I've seen 3 places that are empty right now, on driving, and not that
One of the things that caught my ear when you were discussing that was when you were talking about, free parking and public transportation. I don't think the public transportation piece applies too much to Oviedo. I mean, we're too small to have some sort of mass transit
Not yet.
system.
Yeah, maybe not yet.
And I think trying to charge for parking in those spaces would be a mistake. Because the parking that is available, people would have to pay for, and that would kind of negate some of the purpose of having the parking itself.
We are not proposing to have paid parking in Oviedo in any way. We were just saying that the access parking and free parking, this has implication for funding transit. That's something that all cities have. But we are not proposing, we are not there, not close to that. So, I mean, that's not something that we have been discussing. The only thing that we are discussing is that for areas that we want to stimulate pedestrian, we cannot have the excessive amount of parking that we do. And parking requirements, and we're going to revise that based on national statistics in different settings, so cities compared to cities comparable to Oviedo. What it shows is that the parking requirements are planned for Christmas, so that has an effect on the way the business is placed. You have the standalone building with the ocean of parking spaces that are most of the time empty. So we have to find a balance. Maybe Orlando went too far in that area, of reducing too much. We don't want to do that. Orlando has a different, configuration than we do. But we have to make something that is reasonable. Sometimes we have our parking requirements already very high. Some business come in, they want to provide more because they want to provide this very easy, access to parking, which is good maybe for one side, but it's not for the city, as a whole, and for the character that it promotes. So if we are worried about, and concerned about having a nice character to the city, we have to pay attention to the design, the urban design, and to be pedestrian friendly. One of the things that is coming up in the survey is that, allow the downtown to be pedestrian friendly, allow for bike paths and that kind of thing. So we have to find a balance, but we don't want it to go that far, that we restrict,
One of the, going back to parking, in the sense where one of the things that, as working in a business that works in Oviedo, has their offices in Oviedo, echoes what other members of the board have said, that, our code, in a sense, is one space per 200 square feet for professional office. Most business owners, are pretty much using that same number, one employee per 200 square feet as a use. So I know that's why it matches up, but, by the time you add the handicap spaces, you end up with less than, that one per. And what we have found in most cases when we've looked for new space in the city of Oviedo we can't find any adequate office that exists right now that has adequate parking to meet our requirements for what we consider to be our employment count, you know? So I know when we came in one day, I think even my boss, owner, said that was his first thing he echoed was that, you know, please don't decrease, you know, or maximize the parking, that there's not enough now. And I've been in that situation in currently my third office building in Oviedo where we have blown out the parking spots. We do not have enough space that we're parking in the right of way. Please don't tell code enforcement, but we're all over the place, you know, just trying to provide adequate parking. So yeah, I'm a little discouraged about reducing. Again, I understand in the urban setting where we can share parking, you know, where you have residents
that's
parking
the
at night
idea,
or
yeah.
restaurants or offices during the day, that's one thing, but, you know, in your standalone place, you know, we're tight already. We don't need to reduce it.
Yeah, in certain situations where you start to have more density, then you start to have structured parking, right? That you also can share between, you know, different offices and different users. So that's, I think, the next round. The transition is the problem. When you have, you know, a very urban situation, you already have solutions for, you know, you would have a parking garage, you know, built, but it's the transition that we have to be careful, you know, not to, you know, to be economic friendly, but also be, you know, pedestrian friendly and all have the right character and all that. So.
Are there other questions or comments? Deborah, if the board wants to look at this and make recommendations as to which items ought to come to PZA, would we do that at a regular meeting, such as someone would make a motion that PZA review ABC? Would we need to do it that way? Can we do it in a work session setting? What's the appropriate way for us to deal with that?
Right now, we're taking what the board would like to do, and we're going to incorporate it into the land development code. But what we're going to do before we start writing the policies, we're going to do a recap with both City Council and with you all. So at the next meeting, we'll be able to have, if you all will send us your suggestions, we'll be able to have it back at the next meeting so that you all will know what each one of you have decided. And then you can tell us as a board what you'd like to do.
Okay.
That next, the recap, have we scheduled it?
September 9th.
September 9th, okay. And that's with this board, that's September 9th?
Oh, September, it's City Council.
Okay.
So it should be,
It'll be in September, can it be in August, the end of August?
it can, but the survey goes up to September 1st. So we have to plan that, yeah.
Okay, so we may have to do a special meeting before.
Yeah.
Okay. You'll be able to decide. We'll bring back all of your surveys.
Before it goes back to council.
We'll have to do it before it goes to council.
So if your survey ends September 1st and council meets September 9th,
Yes.
and we don't meet till September 10th.
Yeah, we'll have to do a special meeting.
So we can,
The end of August or the beginning of, it has to be after the survey. We'll have to figure it out. If we need to schedule a special meeting, we'll let you know,
Okay.
which it looks like we will have to schedule a special meeting.
Okay.
What's the first Thursday in September?
microphone. Third,
Is that the third?
The 3rd's a Tuesday.
So that Thursday, the third is a holiday, right?
Monday.
Tuesday's a holiday.
Tuesday is a holiday.
The second's a
The
holiday.
second,
The
yeah, it's
second is
Monday,
a
it's
holiday.
Labor Day, right?
Okay. So what about that first Tuesday?
The third?
Yeah.
I will possibly be out of town. I'm not sure yet.
You don't want to talk about signs anyway, so.
You're damn right I don't want to talk about signs.
going to be a recap. Teresa, what were the issues we were going to talk about?
It will be visual preference survey, approval process, our proposal, and we have planned sign flags. Discuss this.
Just one little small section of the sign?
It is a small section. It's just, and it's really, already,
Small section, take an hour and a half.
We can start on that signage now. It's probably get done by next year.
Yeah, really?
it is just flags, and it's just an amendment to the Land Development Code.
Does anyone else know if they'll be gone?
Signs are important, Ernest. We used to have, 10 years ago, we used to have a guy that used to sit on the board that helped write the original sign code, used to come to all our board meetings every time. Signs have been important in Movina forever.
Are there any other questions or comments for Teresa?
So the second, the third
The
looks
third.
okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so.
Is there, I'm sorry, is there a date that you would like all our stuff to be able to compile by?
Teresa, do you have a date?
The sooner the better, I would say, but it's,
You want to give them a
Well,
week?
perhaps by our next meeting? Is that August 13th? Is that soon enough, or you need
No,
it?
we'll need it before that, so
Before-
we can
yeah.
discuss it at the August 3rd
Okay.
meeting. So it should take no longer than another week. for
That
you
would
all
be
to do
great,
that. Is
yeah.
that
Can,
okay?
can I ask Patty to send out a reminder,
next week.
like on Monday? Yes.
So we need to be able to report.
It's just,
Yes.
if you don't have any comments, just send something that says I don't have any comments. So we just have,
I won't be on the 15th. I'll be in the middle.
Okay, how many won't be here on the 13th? Two, okay.
add another strike to his absentee list there.
Yeah, we'll get to that part. So yeah, if Patty could send out an email next Monday, reminding everybody to get it to you right away.
And I'll send you the table tomorrow morning,
Okay,
okay?
thanks. Any other questions for Teresa? Thank you. Deborah, do you have anything else? Okay. I'm sure you all saw the list of absences on the dais. When I met with Deborah and we were going over some of the issues with the board and staff, one thing that I came across is that the Land Development Code requires the chairman to report to council whenever a member fails to attend 2 of 3 consecutive meetings. Quite frankly, I didn't even remember that was in the code. It had been so long since I read it, and we've never done it. It's not my plan to start doing it, so don't think that's what's happening. When we're kind of, I guess, stirring up things with telling council what we think ought to come before this board and stuff, they tend to look at us more closely, as they did a couple of years ago. We got their attention and we kind of got slapped around for it.
Yeah.
So I just wanted everybody to be considerate of this, that this is something that they look at. And
Larry made me miss 3 last
if
year.
there's, things come up, you have to work, whatever, just be sure to let everybody know ahead of time. And if there's some way you can work your schedule around it so that you can be here, that's great. But I don't want council coming back on,
I understand.
because sometimes we get their attention more than we want. Okay, is there anything else?
Yeah, I'll be at El Potro tomorrow. I'll be at El Potro tomorrow doing a show from 7 to 9.
Okay, we got your advertisement.
That's my advertising.
Yes. Is there anything else? Do we have a motion to adjourn? We still have to adjourn.
So made.
Okay.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? We stand adjourned.
I thought we had adjourned from the original meeting. Do we?
That's when you were trying to run out.